I would now like to introduce Kyle Wiens, who will be joining us online. Kyle is a passionate right to repair advocate of many years and the co-founder and CEO of iFixit. Hi, Kyle. Over to you. Thank you very much for joining us.
Hi, Leanne. Thanks so much for having me. This is awesome. I'm thrilled we are having this again. I'm excited to be able to say again. I hope that this is really the start of a long-term tradition. Um, there is just a huge amount that is happening in the world of repair. I'm going to give you a little bit of an update of what is happening in the U.S. And just to give you some kind of context and background on iFixit before I walk you through what's happening with right to repair in the U.S. iFixit is my organization. Our mission is to enable everyone to repair all of their things. So we're a pro-consumer advocacy corporation. We sell parts and tools to fund their work, but primarily we're a mission-driven organization, and we do everything we possibly can to make repair not just possible but easy for all the things in our lives. This is the Google step-by-step repair guide that's on iFixit, and we're excited that now we're collaborating with Google on these, and we're selling these around the world, including in Australia. So you can get official Google parts, which is really exciting. And this is something that even a year ago was maybe something that would have been a bit of a stretch to imagine. We do everything we can to inspire the next generation. This is a repair workshop that we ran with some school kids last month. We had an absolute blast. We tell kids, hey, do you want to take this stuff apart? And they look at us like we're crazy because every adult in their life has been telling them, no, you can't take things apart. And we give them permission and agency, and it really opens eyeballs. And so that's, I think the question is, how do we move into a future where repair is the default, the norm, and not just this, sort of edgy sideline activity? If we're going to build a circular economy, we really have to focus on the users, the owners of the products first. So looking at where we've come from, this is we used to have repair in our ecosystems. We don't anymore. There's a lot of reasons. Labor is expensive, but underlying it, there's kind of been a systemic shift. So this is an article that was in the Washington Post this week. Jeffrey Fowler spent 2 months going to all the tech manufacturers and asking them, how long does your stuff last? Do you make batteries available? How long are the batteries designed to last for? And the manufacturers overwhelmingly couldn't tell them. Apple knew the answers, but then on like the AirPods, Apple refused to answer. Tells you that Apple didn't like the answer. Companies like Nintendo wouldn't tell him how long the battery on the Switch was designed to last. So this is frustrating, and we have to move toward a world where things last longer. I took this photo in Patagonia's repair workshop where they are extending the lifespan and making their products last as long as they possibly can. So how do we get to the future where repair jobs are green jobs, where repair really is a cornerstone of our economy? It's going to take right to repair legislation. All of us are talking about it. We've got the American president on board, which is very exciting, and we've been making progress over the last year. So a U.S.-based shareholder advocacy organization called As You Sow negotiated an agreement with Microsoft where Microsoft agreed with their shareholders voluntarily to make their products easier to repair. And then they did a report around this. I'm not going to make you read all this small text, but this is a report that Microsoft released looking at the greenhouse gas reduction of a repair-based business model. Basically, they were comparing a product that they redesigned to make it easier for Microsoft themselves to repair the product in situ, on site, rather than sending it back for remanufacturing. So they had two products that from two different generations that they compared, and they found absolutely massive greenhouse gas reductions. Just if you look at Microsoft doing repair themselves, not even considering the advantages of user doing repairs. So the science is on our side. The carbon impact is on our side. Now we have to turn that into action. Unfortunately, Microsoft is systematically starting to redesign their products to make them easier to repair. We've seen Google and Samsung launch self-repair programs this year. Apple announced one last year, and then it's starting to roll out slowly parts for their products. Across the U.S., there's quite a few states that have introduced right to repair laws. The Federal Trade Commission has started weighing in. And the big exciting news is, as of last month, New York State is the first jurisdiction in the world that passed a broad, sweeping right to repair law that covers electronics of all products, not just um, not just cars, not just niche products. This is a really big deal. Right now, the status of this legislation has been passed by the House and the Senate. It still needs to be signed by the governor, but all indications are that the governor will be signing this soon. Here is a kind of map of where we're at with legislation in all the different states. The U.S. is a complicated place. We're in a federation of many different states. Every state kind of charts its own path, but you can see we are getting increasingly close to the finish line in many of these states. We also passed a electric wheelchair focused right to repair bill in Colorado. So feeling really good about New York. It's the first time after, I was looking at I was pulling some slides for this deck and found some slides that I made in 2013. We've been tilting at this windmill for a very long time, and it's exciting to finally get something over the finish line. We've also made progress in Europe, and I think Anthony may be talking about that more soon, and in Canada, and I will also defer to Anthony on that. But this is clearly a global groundswell. Including this is kind of a first for us. The Indian government has set up a commission within the Department of Consumer Affairs to start investigating right to repair, and they've been making strong signals that they want to do something. So the time really is now. There's a heck of a lot going on. I wanted to talk very briefly about kind of the frameworks and the different things that we're fighting for. We have to enable the product design itself needs to be repairable. And that's something that really needs to be done at the consumer and almost more at a labeling level. You see consumer hostile designs, like I found this screw on the bottom of this coffee machine. It's an oval shaped screw that's just designed to trick you into thinking you can't open the product. Very frustrating. So these repairability ratings are rolling out. We'll learn more later about the French government system, but I want to say it really is having a significant impact. Here's a report that US PIRG put out last year evaluating companies, and they were able to use the data from the French index to put out a scorecard of companies, which is really helpful. And then this is a survey that Samsung conducted where they found that 80% of customers would give up their favorite brand for a more repairable product. So we continue to see market barriers to longer lasting products. These are areas that we think could have a key impact. And I wanted to share kind of what our strategy in the US has been to tackle each of those. And at the state level, we've been focused on parts, tools, and information. At the US federal level, we've been more focused on copyright and things that federal agencies can do. And here's a little bit of a map of across the landscape of right to repair. So the state level legislation is focused on equitable access to parts, tools, and information. And at the federal level, we're really focused on fixing some of the copyright, warranty, and labeling issues that really have to happen at the US federal level. And of course, I think we need to look at winning this war. This has to be a global strategy. There's some things that are going to work better in certain jurisdictions. The European Commission is going to be much better than the US government at regulating product design. We don't do that very well. So I want to kind of challenge all of you to think about this from a global perspective. Where can Australia add special value? Where is there special appetite? Where is there sort of increased focus maybe on rural areas, on resiliency and local self-reliance, maybe off-grid technologies? You all are the experts more than I, but I would challenge you to think about, as we look at weaving this global tapestry of support for consumers, of increased access to repair regulation, where does Australia fit into that puzzle? And I will leave it to the rest of you to figure that out. Thank you so much. We're really excited. We're making a lot of progress around the world.
It's a joy to listen to you speak and your passion around repair. Thank you very much. What we'll do is open for, I've got a couple of questions just for you now before we move to Anthony, if that is okay. In terms of the Samsung decision to work with you in spare parts, I'm interested to know what kind of work went into that to bring Samsung on board in relation to the Galaxy spare parts.
Samsung is not an easy company to work with. Samsung approached us. It happened relatively fast. They approached us right around the beginning of the year and said, "Okay." I mean, it was a little bit of we cry uncle. Okay, fine. We're willing to consider taking this on. It clearly was something that was driven by the regulatory environment. I don't think that they would have done it outside of that context. But once Samsung committed to do it, they were all in. They've been laser focused. We've had people from Samsung at our office for the last month working on the rollout, and we're really excited. Finally, we've got parts that are out there now. The Samsung partnership is starting in the U.S. only at first. We're hoping to expand that globally soon. With Google, we were able to roll it out worldwide initially. But I would say it really takes executive level buy-in, and the executives are paying very close attention to the regulatory environment.
And just a couple of questions from Slido for you. From Mahesh, is reuse of electronic systems in the defence, railway and industrial systems something that's being done at the moment? Being done in military, for example?
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, we have seen increasing interest in board level repair at the industrial level. If you think about a circuit board, it's almost its own device. There's dozens of individual devices on there. There's absolutely no reason to be chucking a circuit board when it stops working. We should be repairing it. I learned that myself. Jessa Jones taught me how to fix an iPhone circuit board, and I replaced a component that was half the size of a grain of rice. It can be done. It's probably not going to be done by consumers, but it can certainly be done by professionals. And I think that it's something for industries to look out for. And I would also say, as we talk about availability of information, repair information, that has to include access to schematics and full bill of materials, including all the way down to the subcomponent level on these circuit boards.
Thanks, Carl. We might leave the questions there, and we'll I'd like to introduce Anthony Rosborough, who is joining us. Anthony is a lawyer and also a PhD student at the European University in Florence. So welcome, Anthony. Thank you very much, and for providing an update on Canadian right to repair developments, as well as hopefully some European developments as well. Over to you, Anthony. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Leanne. And Kyle's always a tough act to follow. He's an energetic guy that knows everything about the right to repair. So I'll try and make this interesting for everyone. The constitutional context in Canada is probably the first place to begin. What I thought I would do is draw just a basic picture of the policy and legal context in Canada, and then move into kind of how things have taken shape over the past couple of years. So really, in the right to repair space, we usually talk about the three main areas of legal reform. There's intellectual property, there's competition, and there's consumer protection. And in Canada, the jurisdictional makeup of those areas of law are kind of straddled between the federal government and provinces in a very inconvenient way in terms of having productive reforms towards the right to repair. So consumer protection laws, for example, are generally within the exclusive jurisdiction of the provinces, with some exceptions. IP laws are generally federal in nature, and competition laws are also federal, with some aspects regulated by the provinces. And the result is that in Canada, we've seen a bit of a legislative paralysis, you might call it, amongst policymakers as to who should be the first to act. And so the consensus at the moment is that IP reforms are really needed first in order to enable the provinces to act. But progress even on that front has been a little bit slow, although there's been some inklings of hope. So if we look back to, as far as back as 2009, we've had right to repair reforms proposed in Canada targeted towards the automotive sector. And this gives us a good kind of example or precedent for how broader right to repair legislation might move ahead. And so those early reforms were really targeted at unrepairability and amending the Competition Act by requiring independent repairers to have access to tools, training, and diagnostic information for automotive vehicles. But because of IP concerns, dating back then, the auto industry and government settled on a voluntary agreements to provide access to those things. And so even then, going back more than 10 years now, this kind of IP is very much the elephant in the room. Provincially, we have seen some movements towards the right to repair, but again, a little bit hesitant to push to the end line because of this looming IP concern. So, for example, in 2019, we had this Ontario provincial bill that sought to require manufacturers to provide parts, tools, and information for electronic products. And so the introduction of that bill created for a lot of head scratching and industry pressure to drop the bill on account of the potential to undermine IP rights. And so the effort was effectively shelved, with attention being directed again to the federal government to address IP. And then secondly, in 2019, we also saw an introduction of a Quebec bill that goes a little bit farther in terms of what it aims to do. So rather than just apply to electronic products, it applies to all goods which are the object of a contract. And what this means in practice generally is products which have warranty agreements associated with them. And so that bill, the Quebec bill, not only obligates manufacturers to provide parts, tools, and information, but also establishes a sustainability rating to score products. So perhaps borrowing from the French Repairability Index, it's not quite clear, but a similar system. And that takes a more punitive approach, the Quebec bill, by creating a new regulatory offense of planned obsolescence, the minimum fine of $10,000. And it defined planned obsolescence as a set of techniques for reducing the mean time to first failure of goods destined for sale. So it really tried to capture, in a more heavy-handed approach to kind of these techniques imposed by manufacturers. And so again, just like the Ontario bill, the Quebec bill received unanimous support among members of the Quebec National Assembly, but it's still to this day being studied by committee. And media reporting is sort of suggesting that very little, if any, progress is being made. Again, suggesting that this looming IP issue is kind of what needs to be tackled first. And so there has been some movement there. Thankfully, there's some reason for optimism in terms of federal IP reforms. The Liberal Party of Canada, which is Canada's governing party at the moment, made enabling the right to repair part of its election platform in the 2021 election. And the government has now introduced two bills to that effect. So the two bills are essentially a reintroduction of the same bill, but the goal is to create a new exception allowing circumvention of TPMs, or digital locks, for the purposes of diagnosing, repairing, or maintaining a product with embedded software. And this is the first attempt we've seen at any kind of IP reform at the federal level, and it received unanimous support in Parliament at the time it was introduced, and again when it was reintroduced. But of course, the devil will be kind of in the details that are studied in committee when the real kind of hearings are held, and we have industry pressure coming in to kind of scrutinize the bill on its own merits, but also within the context of Canada's international obligations under international IP agreements. So we would probably need to see a lot more IP reforms at the federal level to give provinces fully what they need to make amendments to their Consumer Protection Acts, but it's certainly a start. And this federal bill, addressing TPM circumvention for this very specific purpose, by being a purpose-driven approach for repair and diagnosis, it means that in order to fall within this exception, you can envision a lot of arguments about what was the real purpose of that circumvention. Was it indeed repair, and how do we define repair as opposed to innovation or modification? And so that remains unaddressed, but you can sort of see that coming as it's studied in committee. There's another reason, another area where we might see some reforms coming, and Canada's Competition Act is currently slated for a whole slew of reforms. Because it's, like a lot of competition acts in the world right now, a little bit out of date when it comes to regulating large technology companies. And so there's an opportunity there for Canada to amend its Competition Act to make it more repair focused in terms of facilitating repairs in secondary markets and giving independent repairers the ability to have access to parts, tools, and information, as Kyle mentioned. And so currently there is really in the Canadian Competition Act a very narrow window in which IP rights can be the subject of a competition law complaint, and it's not open to private parties to make a claim for that type of abusive conduct. It has to be referred by the Attorney General of Canada, and so it's a very closed process, and we've seen only one hearing ever proceed that level. And so one opportunity in Canada might be to open that up to any interested private party to make such a claim that IP rights are being used to suppress competition in secondary markets. And we've seen some policy documents from Canada's Competition Bureau kind of indicating that their minds are headed in that direction. But that we'll see how the next few months play out. But beyond those kind of like very legislative heavy, like recent activity in Canada, there's also some reasons just for optimism in terms of repairability and grassroots efforts in Canada more broadly. So, I mean, I've painted a fairly technical picture, but, for one, we have a really strong community of tool libraries and repair cafes across the country, even in very remote areas that, as Kyle pointed out, are sort of pushing repair towards that resilience narrative that I think there's a lot of opportunity in both Canada and Australia to kind of get some mileage out of in terms of selling the political economy of repair. We've also seen some municipal initiatives with a lot of promise. So very recently, there's the District of North Vancouver just enacted a new bylaw which requires the reclamation of lumber from home demolitions. So again, far removed from iPhones and AirPods, but still very much targeted towards a circular economy and waste disposal and repairability. We've also seen some really compelling policy research going on at the moment that should help these pending reforms in Canada, because we've seen agencies in Canada say, we want to make reforms here, but we don't have enough data. We don't have enough information. We don't know the whole scope of the products that are impacted by it. And so we can't craft responsive policy. And so thankfully, we've got a few NGOs and standard settings bodies that are carrying out that type of research right now. One of which is Equiterre, which is an NGO based in Quebec that is nearly finished. It's the first Canada-wide study on the obsolescence of electronics and electrical appliances. So there's some really promising work there in terms of getting the data we need to actually make responsive policy. And so just to close, I mean, anyone that's been following the right to repair knows that progress is never linear, and it's sometimes very difficult to measure. Where are we in the fight, and when have we achieved the right to repair? This is sometimes not easy to determine, but I think that Canada has a lot of really compelling efforts afoot at the moment. And when Parliament resumes sitting in the fall, I think we'll have a better sense of where things might go from here, whether it's more IP reforms or if it's looking at the Competition Act.
Thank you so much, Anthony. That was a fantastic overview of what's happening in Canada. I'm just curious, before we go to general questions from the room and Slido, Canada and Australia have similarities in terms of our agricultural kind of strengths. What's really been happening with agricultural right to repair in Canada? Can you just give us a quick update?
Well, there has been a bill introduced for circumvention of TPMs in agricultural equipment. So sort of like a parallel legislative efforts towards to what we've seen already for the electronic products TPMs repair circumvention bill. So that bill has been introduced, received overwhelming support from parliamentarians. But again, I think we can expect to see it. We can expect to see it receive similar response in committee when it's being studied. And it also addresses not just repair, but interoperability. And I think Australia, just like Canada, has a very booming short line manufacturing industry. So this is manufacturers of products that interoperate with dominant agricultural machines. So an implement that plugs into, for example, a John Deere combine. And so these industries need to circumvent TPMs for the same reason that repairers do. And so we've seen some effort afoot amongst Canadian manufacturers of these products to urge for the same types of legal release valves. And I think it adds a lot to the momentum towards repair in Canada, because it creates the narrative that this is also important for competition and sustainability of our economy. So I think there's some good normative basis there, but we'll see how Parliament actually responds in the fall.
Thank you very much. So I might open to the floor here, as well as through Slido for those of you online, preferably everyone through Slido here and online, to pose some questions to Kyle and Anthony. I have one here from Wayne, who's asking, should there be some legislation around the potential for manufacturers to charge excessively for spare parts once these schemes are in place? What do you think about that?
I might defer to the lawyer on this one.
Well, so the Ontario bill in 2019 actually included a provision to this effect, and also same pricing on manuals as well, and the difference between a print manual versus an electronic copy. And I think should is yes. The viability again will come down to what is the willingness of policymakers to take on that kind of, because the reality is when you introduce a bill like that, and we've seen it in Ontario. Policymakers are flooded with letters from local chambers of commerce, industry groups, putting a lot of pressure on them to not go with these types of requirements. So should, yes, absolutely. Will or can, that depends on the kind of the mood of the room and the winds the direction that the winds are blowing at the time.
Thank you. Yes.
Yeah, in the U.S., the language that we've used has been fair and reasonable terms for parts. But then I think it's really key that the information must be free of charge and available to everyone. Click agreements or anything like that. The information has to be free.
It's a really interesting point, Kyle, because Australia's first right to repair law, which Leslie will speak about, basically has the effect of removing copyright over those repair information manuals, and that's something that we're really pleased to see here in Australia, to enable free access to the data and repair information. And Leslie will speak more about that, but that's a really interesting, given that Anthony and I are both intellectual property lawyers, I think that's an interesting development. I have one again from Mahesh. How does a manufacturer protect their intellectual property but at the same time disclose a schematic? And this is something that is a valid concern. About manufacturers have invested a lot of R&D in their developments and do have intellectual property rights over some of those developments. So Anthony, perhaps I'll refer that to you first.
Yeah, so there's a few ways you could answer that question. I think when it comes to intellectual property, we see manufacturers of various products using it, as a kind of performative term. We're protecting our intellectual property, and I think if you probe and you ask a little bit further, what is it you're protecting? Is it the subject of a patent? Is it copyright? Is it trademark? What you get is kind of more like it's something within the realm of trade secrecy, and of course, depending on the jurisdiction you're in, I mean, trade secrets may or not be considered hard IP. They might be considered, something a little bit different than copyright or a patent. And so, how do they protect their IP? I think when a manufacturer puts a product on the marketplace, and there's some responsibility that goes with what happens to that product during its lifespan. And it can be, for the most part, in many cases, reverse engineered. And so, what IP is being safeguarded by not releasing a schematic, I guess would be my question in response. I think if it's really just a matter of know-how to repair the product, is that the reason that we grant intellectual property rights, is to prevent that type of behavior? I mean, I think the reason we grant IP rights, normatively, is because we want to incentivize others to invent and create and produce useful things for us to enjoy and to build a public domain. And so, if we're granting IP rights to really keep markets closed and anti-competitive, then perhaps we're granting them for the wrong reasons, and that's where exceptions should apply. So I guess that'd be my very theoretical response, is that maybe this isn't an area in which manufacturers should be able to protect their IP.
Thank you, Anthony.
Yeah, and
we have a couple more questions here.
Go ahead.
I'd like you to answer too. That'd be great.
Yeah, I was just going to say, at a practical level, we're really talking about the right to repair things in a cost-effective manner. As Anthony says, you can reverse engineer a product. I can take a product and I can painstakingly spend weeks and I can create my own schematic. There's nothing that's in the schematic that I can't deduce from the physical product. It's just a time thing. And every repair shop in the world doesn't have 2 weeks to spend reverse engineering every product before they can work on it. Some do, and so that's where you get specialized board repair shops. But once you put the product out in the world, it's not, the board layout isn't a trade secret anymore. So I think we need to step back to those kind of facts on the ground. Once you ship the product, the schematic's not a trade secret.
Thank you. We have a question from Jane to you, Anthony, about the importance of community initiatives. Is there an organisational response to uplift the voice of repair from a grassroots level in Canada, for example?
There are a number. So, I mean, there's ones that are more focused on policy reform, and those that are more focused on, like actual community repair efforts on a practical level. And so, one of them is, on the more policy side is Can Repair, and then, on the more practical side, we have the Share Reuse Repair Initiative in British Columbia, and we have tool libraries and repair cafes across the country in a network. So. Yeah, there's a lot of efforts afoot. I think where there's an opportunity there to make it fit more with Canada's political economy in Canada, which would apply also probably, I'm guessing, in Australia, is to make repairability and the access to the right to repair something that is seen as a way of rural resilience and self-sufficiency in terms of making sure that communities that are far removed from urban centers can keep on doing what they're doing, and particularly in Indigenous communities, which in Canada are often very remote and have infrastructure that needs to be repaired, without access to a manufacturer licensed technicians. So I think there's a normative case to look at repair as something along the lines of nation building as well.
I love that. Thank you. Thank you. We have a question from an anonymous person. Is requiring that rechargeable batteries in products be replaceable a low-hanging policy fruit that would deliver big benefits? Perhaps, Kyle, I'll throw to you on that one.
Yes.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
We've often spoken about the value of just replaceable batteries or removable batteries. I've seen you often post photos of the images of rubbish trucks exploding from batteries that have been left in devices that have been disposed in general waste. So it's a significant hazard and issue as well.
These batteries are consumable. It's like welding the tires on a car. This idea that you have a glued-in battery that can't be replaced, it's a built-in death clock. The moment you ship the product, it's going to stop working. Find me an iPod that still works. They should. There's no fundamental reason it couldn't still be a music player, but they glued the batteries into all of them.
Very good point. Thank you. From Paul, is there any focus on making sure parts to fix the most common faults are available, which might be more achievable here for our producers are really importers? Perhaps that's not a question for you guys. So in terms of making sure parts are available, we know that in Europe that the manufacturers are required to make spare parts available for up to 10 years, Anthony. Isn't that the case in terms of EU regulations? Perhaps you can share a little bit around that.
Sure. So, I mean, I think what we're touching upon here is the Eco-Design Directives 2019 implementing regulations in the EU, and those address very specific product categories. So it's not for all products, and it's kind of a strange hodgepodge of different products. So there's devices with electric displays, for example. There's welding equipment. There's home appliances. It's kind of a strange collection of products. But so under that regulation, manufacturers are required to provide parts, tools, and information. But most importantly, only to professional repairers. And it defines professional repairers in a way that gives manufacturers essentially the ability to determine who and who is not professional. So, I mean, I think that regulation in the EU shows a lot of promise for a direct, way of regulating exactly what manufacturers have to provide. But it also shows that if you leave enough wiggle room to manufacturers to kind of to set the terms, that it might fall short of being effective. So yeah, I mean that there's only so much good hope that we can expect from that. I mean, I think it's definitely a step in the right direction, but we would want to see repair and access to parts, tools, and information be available to everyone, whether or not they're a business or they carry a policy of insurance, or these types of requirements like we see in the Eco Design Directive.
Thank you. Kyle, did you want to add anything?
No, that's right. The existing EU laws that have been passed are not sufficient. We need to go farther. But I think everyone at the commission level on through understands what the limitations are and is working hard. And there's the upcoming. There's a lot upcoming that will address that. So I think it's stay tuned. But if you're in the policy development space, there's a lot of kind of draft documents that we can loop you in on that shows things are moving in the right direction.
Thank you. And Kyle, another question for you from Matthew. Do you see any impact from the EU initial decision making on unifying charging cables in the rest of the world?
Well, I think it's a good example that like eco design can happen, right? Like you can decide to mandate something. And I mean, in this case, they tried the nice approach and Apple decided to work around it. So then they passed a law basically just targeting the iPhone. And we may need that. I think these glued-in batteries are enough of a design default now. It's just easier. It's lazy design to glue a battery in. It's easier. It's faster. It's initially more durable. And so the default is going to be glued-in batteries in all products unless governments step up and say, no, that's actually not in society's best long-term interests.
Just another question for you, Kyle. Is there any focus on making sure that the parts to fix the most common faults are available, which might be more achievable? So these are what we're finding, certainly in the Repair Cafe movement, that often in a complex machine, that it's often a simple fuse or a bulb or a switch that is the part that fails.
Yeah, and that's where parts harvesting can fail you, right? Because you'd say, well, the default if the manufacturer doesn't sell parts is you take screens off of phones and you'd use those phone screens to fix other phones. Well, if the phone screen is always the thing that breaks, it doesn't help you. So this is where the repair scoring methodologies, they prioritize called priority components. You see this in the French index, is certainly there in iFixit scorecard, where there is incentives for making sure that those specific components are prioritized. The trick from a policy-making perspective is that's different in a laptop than a cell phone, than a toaster. And so it means that you have to develop these product category specific repair scoring methodologies, but that seems to be the direction that Europe is going. That's been the direction that iFixit has gone with our scorecard. We'll see where other jurisdictions go, but I agree. There's certainly some parts that are much more important to get out in the world than others, starting with consumables.
There's a question from Les. Is there some merit in creating a public list of devices which already have replaceable batteries so that people know, for example? And that's one criteria that you look at in your repairability scoring, isn't it, Kyle?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing we look for is there a service manual available? Are there parts available? And I would give this advice to any consumers. People ask me, what should I buy? I say, before you buy it, Google to see if there are parts available. Just Google thing parts. And if you can buy them, perfect. And if you can't, get a different brand. So absolutely, I think that's step one is, are parts available? Are they available to the public? Are they at reasonable prices? That's where we need to start.
Yeah, fantastic. Another question. What are your thoughts around the liability issues in case of an incident that's due to bad repair? And I'm assuming that this is by an unauthorised repairer, but we know that there's also bad repair by authorised repairers. But do you have any thoughts on that, Kyle?
Well, there are many things that you can do along the way that could cause harm. Imagine like I'm changing the battery in my car and I drop it on my foot. I could hurt myself, right? There's liability along the way. I could go underneath my car and I could cut the line to the brakes. Then if I crash into someone, it's not the car manufacturer's, it's not Ford's fault that I cut my brake line. It's the liability is on me. So I think that I think our existing liability and consumer responsibility laws handle just fine. And as we have gone down this path with lawmakers in many countries, this really has not been a hurdle. I would also say people are already fixing this stuff. So look to existing precedent.
Yeah.
Can I add to that? Sorry. Can I add to that?
Sorry, we have a question. Sorry.
Oh, sure. Sure, go ahead.
Sorry, we have a question. Oh, sorry, Anthony, did you want to say something?
I was just going to say, greater access to repair and distribution of, more people repairing things results in greater knowledge about safety and repair. And so to add to what Kyle said, I think, decentralizing repair makes things safer. That would be my normative argument.
Thank you. We have a question.
Hi, Chloe Davison from Moose Toys. I was curious, Carl, how an industry partner gets started on that journey, potentially with iFixit, and what the process looks like to partner with someone like you, and potentially what are the barriers that either they find stop themselves from officially engaging with you, or stop the process potentially midway through, whether those be legal barriers or like.
Sure. Yeah, that's a great question. We have a fantastic relationship with a lot of companies. iFixit is a wiki, so you can actually engage with iFixit without talking to me. You can just go and upload your service information to iFixit. We're a community. We love sharing. Timbuk2 is a very well-known bag company. They have repair guides on iFixit that they've posted, and people are sewing using their tutorials. All the way over to, we do more sophisticated engagements like we're doing with Google and Samsung, where that went through full legal review. We're integrated tightly with their supply chain. There are, I would say, it's important if you want to survive in a right to repair world, you have to get parts out there. So you need a partner that is going to help you distribute parts. That could be iFixit. That could be many other distribution partners out there. I'd say that the challenges that companies have come across internally has been concerns around liability with batteries. Like, on the one hand, it's a consumable. Everyone needs to replace it. On the other hand, they can catch on fire. What do we do about that? And so part of the way that we've been able to overcome those objections has been by working directly with the battery certifying standards organizations, folks like UL and TÜV Rheinland and others, where they've come out and been helpful and said, hey, here's a way that you can certify safely your process for distributing batteries. And that's an area where iFixit has a lot of expertise because we've been around the block. We've helped overcome these obstacles with a lot of multinationals already.
Thank you, Anthony. Did you have any comments there? There's a question from John. Some consumers will be lazy and just go along with whatever, and others are really motivated to seek out repairs. So how do we relate to that diversity and deal with the fact that not all consumers may seek repair?
If you think about the overall economy, what portion of consumer is going to call a plumber versus fix their toilet themselves? I don't know what that ratio is. Let's say it's 50-50. You're always going to have some people who don't fix things themselves and some people who can, some people who call their friend. That's fine. We need that spectrum of options in the marketplace. There's going to be people who are too busy, who are too intimidated. That's perfectly fine. But if we don't have those options, that's where the resiliency in society tends to fall apart.
We spoke yesterday at the Community Repair Conference about some of the recommendations of our Productivity Commission here in Australia, and both of which I know that you'd be familiar. But one of the ideas is that our consumer body should be able to make what in effect is a super complaint on behalf of a class of consumers who are all experiencing the same defect or fault with a consumer device, for example. So that obviously requires some data collection around that, but is there anything that you think in the United States or Canada that would serve as a model for Australian, or is this something unique that the Australian regulators have thought about?
I think that, in terms of comparing it to Canada's situation, that is unique to some extent. I mean, there are class actions for sure in terms of litigation, but an administrative or policy-driven approach is not something that I think we have a suitable framework for. Though I would, I think that there's a huge utility for that, and I can certainly envision circumstances where that would be very helpful.
I think the UK may have a similar super complaint faculty. I think it's a fantastic idea, and we're looking forward to working with Choice to enable that, because there is a fair amount of specialized knowledge that you need that we've seen in the US. We've seen class action law firms get into this, and they get into it because they're money and they're very short term oriented. I think there's an opportunity for someone like Choice to do a better job than the class action law firms that we've seen in the US.
We're very excited to see some of the recommendations that the Productivity Commission made, particularly those around strengthening consumer protections and consumer rights, and particularly that super complaint, potential for a super complaint. We're quite excited for the government to investigate that further. That's correct. So in terms of further questions, we have a few more here, sorry. What role do you think second-hand parts play in the electronic repair market? And are you experiencing any legal barriers to their use? Perhaps for you, Kyle.
Yeah, so I always think of secondhand parts, or you can think of them as harvested parts. That's kind of the safety valve for repair, and that's the world we've been operating under. For example, I can't get replacement parts for PlayStations or Xboxes, so we buy intact Xboxes, take them apart, we sell the parts. We can't get enough of them. The parts are very expensive, but it's an option. It's just not a great option, particularly when we get to parts that fail all the time. Like the optical drive is a common failure on the Xbox, and I can't sell enough of those things. So the secondhand market is essential. What are barriers that we see? That's where we get into IP and trade barriers. We have a tremendous difficulty moving used products across borders. To the point where we will actually proactively remove logos from products before we move them across the border. Imagine an internal part that has the brand name or logo of a manufacturer. We will physically remove that. Even though it's a legitimate OEM part, it's much easier to move it across a border by removing the trademark entirely. And that's an issue moving gray market goods around the world in any industry, but it's particularly challenging in the secondhand parts world.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, and on that point, I think it's just the counterfeit goods provisions that are in most trademark acts are what enable border enforcement agents to actually seize replacement parts for the reasons that Kyle mentioned. And so, I mean, I think Australia, Canada, the US, we're all suffering with this kind of maybe draconian ability for border agents to seize replacement iPhone screens that have trademarks on them. So that's an area that we all need to look at for reform.
Thank you very much. It's now 10 o'clock, and so I just wanted to extend our sincere thanks for both of you joining us. It's been really insightful to hear the developments. We love to hear you speak, Kyle and Anthony. So thank you very much for contributing to our Australian Repair Summit today. Thank you.